All right, well, thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is the first in what we hope is going to become a longer series of Capture One focused events here at B&H. Just a little bit more about myself. I've been using Capture One, as it were, for the better part of about 10 years. The first number of years I was working on a lot of photo shoots here around the city. I was a full-time digital tech. Later I managed a lot of digital tech, so I worked in sort of every environment you could imagine, capturing directly to the computer. And on basically every photo shoot, we were using Capture One because it was engineered to work on photo shoots. It offered the best image quality. And when you have sort of some of the most demanding clients in the world, you want to give people the best pictures you possibly can. You don't want to leave details to chance. You don't want to leave color to chance. And so forth. About 6 years ago, I joined Team Phase 1 here, starting out doing technical support. And I still do technical support to this day, but I also do a lot of training events, classes like this, as well as our sort of very complete certification program for photo assistants and digital techs and photographers, where we go for 2 days, talk about hardware, talk about software, and all that. So just to kind of spend 2 minutes talking about who we are as a company, because we're a little bit different in the industry of what we are. One of the things is that we're kind of a medium-sized company based out of Denmark. But in this, we've been together a little over 20 years and always working on digital imaging, always working on direct digital capture. And we started out making scan backs for medium format cameras. Today we still make one-shot digital cameras. We can shoot 80 megapixels in medium format photography. And through that, we started making software, and we needed to come up with really, really great imaging algorithms to get the most out of these incredibly high-end cameras. And what we found when we were doing that was that the things that we were doing that were making our cameras better, we could use those same concepts to make other cameras better, to make 35 millimeter cameras better, and to make the cameras that you and I use every day, because I don't shoot everything at 80 megapixels, we can make those images even better and do it better than anybody else. So over the years, we've become a world leader in medium format cameras, but also in on-set software. Capture One is the industry standard when it comes to working on photo shoots. If you sort of pay a little bit of attention when you're sort of watching TV shows and they show like a photo shoot, like in a studio professional photo shoot, take a look at the computer screen if it ever comes up. What you're most likely going to see there is Capture One running in the background. And throughout the years, our main focus has always been on image quality. Can we produce finer details than anybody else? Can we get the most accurate color? Can we recover better highlights, recover better shadows? Everything that we do as a company when it comes to software, our focus is first and foremost on image quality itself. And everything is secondary to that. The one area that we will not make sacrifices is image quality. So Capture One in general. So I put up a little screenshot here, and there's a little arrow pointing to Capture One working on a professional photo shoot. Ultimately, what we're talking about is raw workflow software. What we're designed to do is take all of your raw images and give you a really fast and effective way to work on them, not just as one-off images, but as a whole group of images simultaneously. And I'm going to show you some ways today that we can do that. So that's first and foremost. Secondary is that it is for raw files. Yes, we can edit JPEGs, yes, we can edit TIFFs, but fundamentally, if you want to get the most out of it, it's for the raw files that your camera produces. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is what is a raw file, and why when you go to take pictures did you change the dial on your camera away from JPEG and onto RAW? Ultimately, a lot of the workflow, like I've been saying, is designed for photo shoots, people working in great batch situations. But if you think about it, this is photography in its most demanding form. Even if we're not working on a high-pressure photo shoot, doing large volumes of imagery, there's a lot in Capture One that we can take advantage of. And I'm going to try and show you some of that today. So today's plan, I'm going to start out talking a little bit about raw files. What are they? What can you do with them? Why should you use them? We'll talk a little bit about why Capture One. What is it going to do for me? And then we'll look at Capture One and talk about how do we actually make use of it. Today's class obviously is the introduction. So we're going to keep things fairly basic. We're going to bring images in. We're going to make some edits to them. We're going to get them out. We're not going to talk about every tool. We're not going to talk about every feature, but I want to give you an understanding of what is the overall workflow and what is the potential that you can do with it. So that's kind of our goal today. If you have questions as I'm going along, please write them down. We'll take some time at the end, but at least for the purposes of the discussion that we're going to have now, I'd like to go through the presentation first, and then we'll take questions later. Sounds good? So, what is RAW? Who here shoots RAW already? Oh, good. This will make my job really, really easy. So, for the few of you who don't, fundamentally, we could describe it as sort of the film negative of photography, in the sense that, a negative is used to produce your final image. You can overexpose, underexpose. You can correct for things that maybe in the negative that you couldn't do just trying to edit a print later on. But I've always thought that this sort of analogy isn't quite enough. It doesn't quite capture the full picture. I often kind of think about it along the lines of an artist mixing paint, and think of it this way. If I give you just this really rich blue color, are you ever going to be able to make red out of that? Are you ever going to be able to make orange out of that? You can make it lighter, you can make it darker, you can shift the color a little bit here, you can shift the color there a little bit, but you can never quite produce any color that you want from that blue. But if I gave you a palette of lots of individual colors, you could mix them together in any way you needed to make almost any other color. And that's what we're able to do in a RAW file. So if you think about starting with that blue, that's sort of what you have when you're working in a JPEG or a TIFF. You already have those pixel values. You already have those colors. And you can only make them a little lighter, a little darker, but you can't do any sort of major color shift, nothing incredibly transformative. But if I have a RAW file, one of the brilliant things about a RAW file is that we have a separation of color and lightness in the data, and we can mix that data together in any way we want to produce whatever color we want, to produce better detail, to produce finer imagery. So think about the sensor like this. You've got all these little pixels. On top of each pixel is a different color filter. A pixel itself can only see black, and it can only see white, right? So the way we get color is by only allowing it to capture one color of light, whether that be blue, green, or red. And then to get you your final color, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what all these individual pixels are doing and say, okay, this pixel is throwing out this much red, this one's throwing out this much green, this one's throwing out this much blue. If I mix that together, what color do we think this pixel should be? And that's how we're actually getting our color in a shot. So ultimately, we can take separately a calculation for color and a calculation for lightness and darkness and edit them individually. We can take part of this data, part of that data, mix it together, and use that to allow you to edit your files in a new way. So if we take something right off the camera, if we don't do anything with it, we get a whole collection of red, green, and blue pixels. And that's all I have here. These are red, green, and blue squares that are just shown at different brightnesses. And when we stand back, we can see that there's a watch and there's a tomato can there. But I don't have a lot of detail. My color isn't smooth because, again, I'm looking at individual red, green, and blue squares. And so that's what we'd call straight data off of a Bayer sensor camera. So the way we filter sensors in your camera is called a Bayer pattern. So that is a Bayer pattern image. The next image is we've taken all these values and we've tried to determine, instead of showing each pixel as only red, only green, or only blue, well, if we mix them together, what should we get? And here we get a much clearer image. The process by which we go from this image to this image is called interpolation. And interpolation is what sets apart what your camera can do to produce an image, what Capture One can do to produce an image, and what other programs can do to produce an image. The way we get from here to here is proprietary calculations by deciding how to mix these values together, which means that the results I get in Capture One are not necessarily the same as what my camera might produce. So let me show you kind of what we're talking about here. First things first, all cameras capture raw files, right? When I take an image, when that data is read off of the sensor in my camera, whether it be my iPhone, whether it be my Olympus OMD, or whether it be my Mamiya Leaf Credo 80, the first thing that happens is raw data is produced. Then it goes into the processors in the camera, and what happens on the other side depends on what type of file we get. So if I'm shooting in JPEG, I'm letting a small processor in my camera decide how to assemble all that color information and all that pixel information into the final image. And it's going to do it all at once, and it's going to give me a finished result. But if I can shoot raw, then what's going to happen is we're just going to put that raw data into a file format. I'll have the original color combinations. I'll have the original lightness and darkness from all the pixels. And then we can let a program like Capture One go in, use more advanced algorithms, and let Capture One decide how to assemble that image, right? And so the end result is that we can get more accurate colors. We can produce finer details, and we can get greater flexibility with the image itself. So ultimately, our goal here is that if we want to get the most out of the camera, we want to be shooting raw. So let me show you a couple examples here of what I'm really talking about. So I went out over the weekend. I took some pictures in Madison Square Park. So that's the Flatiron building, of course. And it's a little overexposed, right? It's not, I mean, I've got detail in there. It's not so bad, but my sky is blown out. It's quite a bit bright. It's not a great picture. Maybe I should be a little more careful, right? I've been doing this for 10 years after all. So let's try to correct it. So this was a JPEG. I was shooting RAW plus JPEG for this purpose. And when I try to bring it down a little bit, and I'll tell you what, let's go full screen. We'll bring it down. It just becomes gray. The reason it becomes gray when I try to decrease the exposure of this image is that that sky is just all white data. And when you make all white data darker, you just make it gray. There is no additional data for me to pull from to get anything else but a gray image. So my original capture, but captured in RAW. What happens when I decrease the exposure here? That. Suddenly I have all sorts of data. If I zoom in, it looks great. I've got lots of detail. I've got nice tonal transitions. I've got a beautiful blue sky. It was a lovely day yesterday. It looks great. I've been able to save this file even though I overexposed it. Here's another shot. I still can't get my settings right. Right? This is a JPEG. I was pointed, believe it or not, at the Empire State Building. But when you shoot at a 4,000th of a second and f32 and the lowest ISO you can, you don't get a whole lot of data. So let's increase the exposure. Let's see what we get. Ooh, we got something. All right, let's take a look at it. Doesn't look real great. I've got some weird color dots going on. In fact, the building has gone black and white. It's a bit odd. So here's the raw file. It's still black. Let's increase the exposure. Not perfect, but it looks a lot better. The difference between this one and the previous shot is that this is actually a usable file. If I was trying to make a memory of the Empire State Building, this is an acceptable memory. Our previous version, not so much. Again, this is because we have all that original data in the raw file. We have our color data, we have our lightness and darkness data, and we can pull from it, and we can process it different ways to get so much more out of it. When we have a JPEG, we have fixed values for every pixel. And so we can only make those values lighter or darker, or add this much color or that much color. So we always have that starting point, which really limits us. It's like starting with that blue can of paint versus starting with a collection of different colors. The other thing I would look at here is, let's talk about what difference does a raw processor actually make. Because when I create a JPEG, obviously the camera's giving us an opinion on how much can I edit it later, but what about the actual detail itself? So I have this shot here, and let's zoom into there. Bring this up. So this is a file. I believe it's from. I think it's a Panasonic camera, and I started with the raw file and I ran it through. Essentially iPhoto, but Apple uses the exact same raw processing engine for everything in its operating system, whether that be Preview, iPhoto, or even their professional program Aperture. It's all the same raw processing capabilities. And so when we look at this file at 100%, this is what it looks like coming out of Apple. When we look at it in Capture One, same raw file. Same data in, same data out. And you can actually see, if you look at this, where my mouse is hovering here, we've got this little pinwheel. We get a lot more detail in there. And this is all default settings. This is out of the box. Nothing is over sharpened on this. We're just resolving more detail initially, because what happens is all these fine details that you're seeing in the image, everything there is the result of looking at several pixels from the camera, taking all that data, putting it together, and deciding what the final pixel should look like. This is something that we do a better job at than anybody else. You could often say we're better at guessing. We're better at guessing as to what the data should have been in the first place. And that gets you more detail, it gets you better color, and it gets you an overall nicer image quality. The last example that I would show you here is, let's say we weren't paying attention to our color balance in camera. And maybe instead of using an auto white balance on my camera, I had left it on tungsten setting and then went and shot outside and I got really blue images or something like that. So here I've got a very, very blue image. This is the JPEG. And if we want to try and correct this color, let's just try to neutralize the image based on the background. And so we'll click the background. And we get somewhat neutralized color, but I was so blue in this image that when we try to neutralize it, I actually end up losing a fair amount of data. And even if I pull this back a little bit, it's still just really, really blue. There's not much we can correct there. I could maybe spend a couple hours and do something a little bit better than this, but if I've got a raw file, which is the same color, and I neutralize that on the background, we can just change out all the color. We don't have to deal with starting points. We can just swap the color in, swap the color out. When you have a raw file, you can exchange white balance on the image without losing any information whatsoever. There's no compression of color, no compression of tones. You can literally just swap it out. What you captured in the camera is just a little tag in the file saying this is what we started it with, but you can change it later. And that's probably one of the most important things. If you think about the way white balance works on a professional photo shoot, half the time you don't even pay attention to what the camera's doing. You take a little picture of a gray card, take a shot in the computer, we click on that gray patch, gets you perfect color, and now we just shoot with perfect color all day long. So what was happening in camera was much less important to what was happening in the software in that situation. So all that said, let's take a look at Capture One now. So starting out here, to give you an idea of what we're looking at, right now I am running Capture One Pro, but I have it set up as if it's Capture One Express. Since this is kind of an introductory course, I wanted to start out sort of giving you an idea of what's possible in the different softwares. So everything that I'm going to show you today, all the tools that we're going to use, all the features we're going to take advantage of, these are all available in both versions. So if you get the Express version, you'll be able to do everything we did today. If you get the Pro version, you'd be able to do that plus a lot more. So let me just show you really quick. If I change this over to the Pro style layout, and I'll give you a little walkthrough as to what we've got here. Sometimes these things take a little bit longer when we deal with external monitors. Okay, so some of the things you'll probably notice here is when I did that, the overall interface stayed exactly the same. So you're not going to get lost if you're going back and forth between the different versions. What we did gain was some extra tool tabs. So if we look at the overall layout here of Capture One, what you have is this side of the screen is broken down into various tool tabs, and we try to keep the different tools that Capture One utilizes organized into different tabs based on topic and based on the order that you're probably going to use them in. So we start out first with our library where you can find all your images. Then we move into, if you're in the Pro version, the Capture tab where you would control tethered capture. So that's just shooting directly from the camera into the computer. This is what we do on a lot of professional photo shoots. Next you get your color tab, so you can edit your color, then your exposure, followed by lens corrections, crop, sharpening, localized adjustments. Everything becomes available there. Across the bottom, I've got my images. Right now I have them set up in film strip mode, so we can basically pan across. You can also have them scroll downwards if you prefer to scroll down. And if you're like me, you may prefer to view them on the sidebar. So I'm just going to go to the View menu and say, Place Browser Right. So now I have a column of images that we can scroll through and work with. And that's kind of my preferred method of working. Across the top, we've got various toolbar buttons, things like rotate, import, copy and apply adjustments. And then we've got our cursor tools in the middle. Most of the cursor tools you can access from within different tools. So for instance, if I go to the color tab here, when this pops up, I've got a cursor tool available here to change my color. I could also access it up here from the top of the screen. A couple other things we have that are very useful. There's a loop tool. If I click on the loop tool, we can check focus with a loop. Or my favorite and probably most used is the hand tool. You're going to see me use the hand tool a lot today. What I like about the hand tool is it makes it very easy to check focus, because anywhere you double click on the image with the hand tool, snaps to 100%. And when I want to go back out, I can snap to 100% again. The beauty of working in Capture One, when I'm at 100%, I'm seeing all the pixels of the image. I'm seeing all the data, and this is exactly what it's going to look like when I save it out to a JPEG or a TIFF or something like that. We designed Capture One to always be what you see is what you get. A couple of the other things that we have in here, local area adjustments. If I want to change the exposure on just the face or just one side of the image, we can do that through a local area adjustment. That's a Capture One Pro feature. You're not going to find that in the Express version. And then lastly, sort of on the very end here, we have the ability to save out preset ways to process or develop images. So I've got the raw files. I want to turn them into JPEGs. I want to turn them into TIFFs. We can make them JPEGs and TIFFs of varying size levels, varying compressions, and so forth for different needs. Sometimes you want a small image to go on the web. Sometimes you need a big image to make a print out of. We have ways to save presets here, and then I can select a whole group of images and process them all out using those settings. Now, in the Express version, we don't have this same sort of output preset thing, but we do have a one-off. You just select the images you want, select the settings that you want to process, and then click Process. And I'll actually demo that for you guys today. It's really, really easy to use. Typically, we think of needing to do like 5 different types of processing at the same time as more of a pro feature, something that I used to use a lot on set when the client needed TIFFs and JPEGs of everything. We would batch them up at the same time. But for the more casual Express user, we just let you choose your settings each time, and you'll see how easy that is. So that's sort of our basic look around the program itself. What I want to do now is go into a very basic workflow. We're going to get some images in, we're going to work on them, and then we're going to process them out. So I'll just start over here, and let me go back just to make it easier to follow along. Workspace, And I'm going to go back to the Express version. So we'll just do our basic Express layout. Over here in our top left-hand corner is a down button, or a down arrow. That's for importing. So what I'm going to do is in Capture One Express, I'm working with a catalog. When we work in a catalog, the idea is we want to manage all of your files. So in order to work on something in Capture One, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import that image to the catalog. So I've got a folder of images here that are already on my computer. These are all from a trip I did a few years ago to Iceland. And they're specifically of the a glacier bay that's there. It's a really, really impressive place. So to start my import process, the first thing we did here was selected the folder containing those images, which is here on my desktop. I'm going to say open. And of course, we loaded up previews of all those files. That way, if you only want to pick and choose certain images, you can do that. Or we can just import all, which is what I'm going to do here today. The next thing we want to decide is what happens to these files when I bring them into Capture One. There's a couple things we can do. Because Capture One is a catalog, it's keeping all the information about editing the images centralized into Capture One. But where those images actually live on your computer, this is up to you. We have a couple choices here. We can choose to leave them in their current location, which means I'm not moving the files, I'm just making them available to edit by Capture One. We can import them into the catalog itself, meaning I'm going to let Capture One manage my file storage. This is very similar to the way that iTunes works with music. When you add music into iTunes, Apple takes it, puts it in one centralized location, manages all the organization therein. We have that option here in Capture One. Or I can place them in another folder altogether. Because these are already on my computer, I don't really see a need to put them in another folder altogether. I'm going to leave them right where they are. But if I was importing from an SD card from my camera or a compact flash card from my camera, then I would want to actually select the location on my computer where I'd like to store these files. So we give you a number of options. We don't sort of force you to store your images in any particular location. You can either let us do the organization or you can maintain the organization yourself. So we're going to do that. Because I'm leaving them where they are, we're going to leave their names the same as they are. I've got my copyright data built right into the metadata tab here. And so all I'm going to do now is say import all. And here come my files. Let's just, before we get, make sure we're starting from scratch here. So what Capture One is doing when I import it, what it's done is it's made a notation in the catalog saying, OK, these are the images that we're going to allow you to work on. And then what it's doing is it's creating previews. These images here, these are very large files. I captured these with a 60 megapixel medium format camera. So if I'm going to try and work on what amounts to 47 images all at one time, I don't want to load up 60 megapixels times 47 images all at once. So what we do is we generate much smaller, much more easy to handle previews. So that way you can still work very quickly in Capture One, even when you're pushing a lot of data through it. So my previews are generating. I'll bring up one image on screen. And once I've got these in here, if I go over to my library tool, the way this gets broken down is that we have, over here, I'll just zoom in a little bit for you. They came into a section called Recent Imports. So they're available in all images for my catalog. But this specific import shows up as a recent import as well. And I always like to start out by, when I import files, having them go to recent import so that I can then organize them the way I want to. And we've got a couple ways to do this. In the next section down here where it says User Collections, I can make different albums to view files if I wanted. So all those JPEGs and RAW files we were comparing before, I had those stored in a user collection called JPEG and RAW. It's just a basic album where when I want to show you JPEG and RAW files, I click on that, I see those images. I have some other images that will probably come to you later in an album called Capture One Tools. And what I could do here If I wanted to, I could make an album called Iceland. Select all those files and drag them into Iceland, and then I have a place for them. Now, more often than not, what I'll do is the first time I get images in and I want to work on them, I'll leave them in the recent imports, decide what images I want to keep, what images I want to get rid of, start my edits there, and then later transport them into some sort of an album. Maybe what I would do is I'd start out just by going through, and I'm going to press the number 1 when I like an image, and that's going to tag an image with a star, a single star. 1 would equal 1 star, 2 would equal 2 stars, and so forth. So we'll tag that one. Not loving what's happening there. This image is good, but it's crooked, so we'll correct that later. That's okay. Keep that one. So I'm just going through and I'm picking some images that I like, tagging them with a star, and these are the ones that we're going to try and edit in a little bit. Okay. So a portion of these have stars, a portion of them do not. So if we want to try and figure out what do I have that has a star and what doesn't, one of the quick ways we can do this is right here, you've got a filtering tool. And what the filtering allows us to do is if I click on 1 star, I'm now only seeing the 1 star images down at the bottom. So I'm hiding everything that didn't have a star, so I don't have to see it and I don't have to work on it. The other thing that I could do is, let's say we want to make this sort of available all the time. Instead of having to turn on and off my filter, what we can do here in user collections is make a smart album. So I'll go in here. And let's go back to images. Click on the plus, click on Smart Album. And let me call this Iceland Best. And what I'm going to do is we're going to set a search criteria. And this is just going to say rating equals 1 star. Say OK. And when I click on that, this is only showing me 1 star images. And if I go and add another, like add a star to another image that didn't previously have one, that image will automatically show up in here. So it becomes a way that I can manage. Now, this was a very simple smart album, but we could make it more specific. We could tie it to, say, anything with any number of stars, but only with Iceland in the metadata, or something like that. We can limit it to any piece of file name or metadata that we've edited, such as stars, keywords, location, photographer, anything like that. Anything that we can fill out in a metadata field, we can search for a smart album. So this is sort of my first step. I get the files in, I take a look at them, I decide what I actually want to work on, what I actually want to edit. My way of doing that is star ratings. So that's just sort of a very long-winded way to say, bring the images in and decide what you want to work on. Now, once we have our files here, let's see what we can do with them. Let's start out. How about this image here? Now, we can take a look at a couple things. I would generally start out looking at this and say, what do I want to do with this? Well, it's pretty good out of camera. I don't need to do a lot with it, but I'd like to polish it up. Maybe we can enhance the color a little bit. Let's get a little more contrast in there. And a few other things that we might want to do to make it just really make it pop. So first things first, I'm going to click over to my exposure tab, and let's do this. Let's add some contrast to the scene. A little bit much. All right. On the levels tool, if I hit automatic, we'll get a little automatic adjustment there. By squeezing in the ends of these, you add a little bit more contrast, and you try to make use of the full range of data that you have. I'm going to go down to this tool here. This one's called Clarity. What Clarity is going to do for me is it's going to introduce a thing called local contrast. And so instead of just making my highlights brighter and my shadows darker, it's going to do that in the mid-tone. So when I add this, it's really great for just making the image pop overall. And so if we just sort of compare what the next image looks like, you can see that this image has just a little more pop to it. Little vignette on the corners, and let's add some saturation just to really go for it. So now we got a much moodier image, a much stronger image. It's making a little bit more of a statement. So again, we're starting with something similar to this. We're ending up here. Now, this is where the beauty of the design of Capture One comes in. Because remember, we've been designing this software for many years to work on a large number of images all at the same time. So I've edited one file, and it didn't take me very long, but I edited one file. And when I want to get this information onto others, I don't need to start from scratch. I don't need to record anything. What I'm going to do is up here at the top of the screen, this arrow that points up, this copies the adjustments that I just made. So if I click that, I've now made a copy of everything that we modified. And we have a tool that will describe what's going on here. So again, right up here at the top, this box here, this tab here, this is called our adjustments clipboard. What this is going to have for me is anything with a checkbox are tools that I edited here. And so when I copied, we took all the tools that I made adjustments to, copied those values in here, and when I select the next image, all I need to do is press this down arrow, and that's going to paste the adjustments that I copied onto that file. And so now I have those same adjustments. Let's say as well that we had selected a larger group of images. So in this case, I've got 10 images selected. If I press the Apply button now, we apply that to everything all at once. And so we can go very quickly from editing one file to editing the rest. Now, once I've done that, I probably want to go back and take a look at my images just to see if how well do my adjustments apply to everything. The decisions I made about one image may not apply to everything else. For instance, if I go to this file, it starts getting a little dark here. Maybe we'd like to bring that up. And I'll do a little shadow recovery on this. Get a little more detail in there. So that'll make that a bit of a stronger file. I'm also starting to get a little bright here. I can still see some detail, but visually, maybe we want to bring that down just a touch. And again, that's going to improve that file a little bit. But the global adjustments that I made can be applied to everything like that. So again, I could select the rest of these images, apply our adjustments, and have that taken across. So that really at the heart is one of Capture One's key features, is the ability to very easily edit a large group of images. You edit one the way you want it, copy those settings, select the images you want to inherit those settings, and hit Apply. It's literally maybe 4 clicks at the most. Alternatively, we talked about this image here. This image is not too bad, but maybe we want to, first of all, straighten it out because I was very crooked. So I'm going to grab my straighten tool from the top, and I'm just drawing a line along what I believe the horizon should be. And when we do that, we get a nice straight image. Now, if this was the image that I was editing first, maybe I'll draw a crop there as well. So I'll grab my crop tool from the top. And because I rotated the image, it automatically gets a little bit cropped. So let's just grab an edge, pull that down. Grab this edge, pull it up. And there's my crop. So maybe I'm starting out with this is the image that I'm editing. We could probably even add a little better shadow use in there. We'll address it at the end. If you just.
My question is specific to this image.
OK.
The vignette, is it adjusted to your new cropping?
Yes. Yeah, the vignette is going to follow the crop every time. So ultimately, if this is the image that I'm editing this way, there's a couple adjustments in here that if I select the next 4 files, don't really apply. We corrected not only the crop, but we also corrected the rotation. So if I simply copy this and apply this, I end up rotating the other images in ways that I don't want, right? So we don't necessarily want to do that. Let me undo that adjustment. What I can do, if I click the copy button, so that's what I'm going to do right now. So click and copy, and then click on our adjustments clipboard, I can uncheck any boxes that I don't want to include. So if we don't want to include that rotation, and I don't want to include the crop, I'll just scroll down, zoom in so you can see a little bit better, crop and rotation. So we're just going to uncheck those. And now I can hit apply. And you can either hit apply up at the top here with this down arrow, or down here at the bottom where it says apply as well. So just 2 buttons do exactly the same thing. So sometimes one is more convenient, sometimes the other is more convenient. So I'll just hit apply. And now we get all those other adjustments, but we didn't rotate the image. We don't have a crop applied. So you can still decide what gets copied, what does not get copied. So the last thing we want to do here is let's process some files. We want to make some JPEGs here. So let me just pick a few. Grab this image, this image. So there's 4 images. We want to process these. If I'm working in Capture One Pro, I would just have different processing presets enabled and then click the process button, and all of these files would go into a queue and they'd be processed one by one into each enabled recipe. If I'm working in Express, what I'm going to do is go over to the right side of the side. So on the left side, we had our down arrow, which meant import. And on the right side, we have this up arrow, which means export. And so we will click that. And now, in the center of the screen, I choose my process settings. So we're going to decide where do we want the files to be stored. In this case, let's go to choose folder, desktop, and let's just make a new folder here. And I will call this Iceland JPEGs. Set as export folder. OK, so we've got a location for them to go to. Naming. Right now, I'm going to leave them named exactly the same. So I'm just leaving my naming format as image name. But if you need the files to take on a new name, we have a system of what we call image tokens, which you can use to build new naming conventions. It's designed so that you're not just saying, oh, save it as this name. It says, what happens when I have 100 files that I'm processing and I all want them to take on a new naming format. So we use these tokens to build new naming formats. If you want to type something in manually, then you would add the job name bubble there, and then maybe add a counter after that. But however you want to build your file name, we have a lot of ways to do it there. But if you want something just really simple, you don't want to give it a lot of thought, or you don't need to change anything, just leave it at the default setting, which is image name, which means it's just, instead of being called, in this case, yokusarlan66.iiq, which is the raw file, it'll say yokusarlan66.jpg, and that'll be our new image. Under my recipe, this is where I'm going to establish what type of file do I want to produce. We're going to use a JPEG, but we could also do a TIFF. We could convert it to a DNG. We can save it as a PNG or a PSD file. So in this case, I'm going to do a JPEG. Quality level, when you work in JPEGs, JPEGs have compression. That compression scale goes 0 to 100. So if you think about it this way, 80% and above is really, really high quality. 50 to 80 is sort of medium quality, and below 50 is sort of a lower quality. The lower this number, the smaller the image will be. So if I'm emailing it and I want it to be really, really tiny, I would use a lower number. If I want to make a print from it, I would use a higher number, and so forth. So this is going to be what we call our quality. It's our compression level for the JPEG. You can choose our color profile. If you're not very familiar with ICC color profiling, I'll make it very simple. Use either sRGB or Adobe RGB. They will not change much about the way the image looks. They'll look great on every monitor, and you don't have to give it a lot of thought. But if you are doing specialty printing or things like that, you may want to modify that. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to choose the physical size. So this would be, if I printed the image, how big would it print, so forth. We can do this in a percentage. So your camera captures images of a specific size. Like I said, these are 60 megapixel files. Right now, if I leave this at process out to 100% size, I'll get JPEGs that are 60 megapixels in size. If I wanted to process at only sort of a 15 megapixel size image, maybe I'm only making a 5x7 or an 8x10, I could process out at 25% of that, and that would give me sort of a uniform scaling of all my files. Alternatively, that's if I want to work in percentages. We can set specific width, set specific height. The ones that I use probably the most outside of fixed are long edge and short edge. This comes in really handy when you have, some images might be horizontal, some images might be vertical, some images might have different crops. So what this will say is, I always want my image to be either, 10 inches tall or 10 inches wide, whether it is a, if I'm shooting for an 8x10, it's either 10 inches tall or 10 inches wide, and then it's 8 inches on the other direction. But the easiest way to tell software how to do that is you say, take the longest edge of the image, make it 10 inches. So that's what long edge would do for you. That's what short edge would do for you. So let's choose long edge and go 10 inches. I'm going at 300 pixels per inch, so that'll give me a really nice print at 10 inches. Of course, you can change this into pixels or millimeters or centimeters or whatever is most appropriate for the output that you're trying to do. And then if you want it to automatically open up, if you're going to go straight into Photoshop to do something, if you want to view it in preview, we can say open with and choose a program. In this case, I'm just going to let them process out. So these are going to go to a folder on my desktop called Iceland. They're going to have the same name, and they're going to be JPEGs at 10 inches on the long dimension. So we'll click Export. Capture One's doing its processing now. It's going to give me a little bar. And then when it's complete, I get a little message telling me that it's complete. And why don't we go take a look? Desktop, Iceland JPEGs. And there we go. So now we've produced that smaller size JPEG from a very large file, completely edited. So that's sort of our path from import. So we're going to import files so Capture One knows about them, get them into the catalog, figure out what images we want to work on, edit an image, copy and apply those adjustments to other images, and then process those images out to whatever we need. And that's the basic workflow for Capture One. What happens in between there becomes we could talk for hours about organizational technique. We could talk about lots of different tools, but fundamentally, that's your input to output workflow. Think of RAW as a sort of a passing state for the file, but the most important passing state, because this is where we're able to make all of these adjustments without losing information, without introducing a whole bunch of noise into the image, without getting colors that we can't correct, that we can't change. It's the point in between to get us to our final product. So the other thing I want to do here, so now that we've kind of looked at the overall workflow, I want to look at a couple specific tools just to show you kind of what they do, what they're going to do for your images, and some of the situations you might use them. So coming back, a little folder here called Capture One Tools. And if I start around our exposure tab, there's a couple tools I'll look at first, and that's right here below high dynamic range. Now, high dynamic range in Capture 1.7 is a really brilliant tool. We've built a lot of things into our image processing algorithms to give you amazing abilities to recover highlights and recover shadows, because the most common mistakes that we end up making when it comes to images tends not to be so much color, but it tends to be exposure. It's actually really easy to fool a camera's auto exposure algorithms in certain situations. You'll always get a beautiful overall exposure, but when you have shadows mixed with direct sunlight, you have parts of your image which can be overexposed, parts of your image which can be underexposed, and that becomes very difficult to deal with, because now you're either exposing your camera for the highlights, exposing your camera from the shadows, but either way it involves you making a bunch of adjustments later on. This image is actually a really good example of that. Overall, it's a pretty good exposure, maybe a little bit bright. The skin tones are maybe a little bit bright, but overall, if I pointed my camera at the scene, it would probably say that this is a reasonably good exposure. Maybe it's over by a half a stop, but not much. But if we start coming in and we look in the highlights, the detail in the dress is the first thing that we begin to lose here. White is very sensitive. White fabric is very sensitive to what's happening with the sunlight. So if I look at this image and I just make it darker overall, I can get a lot of detail in the dress, but I lose everything else in the scene. Instead, if we go in with the highlight recovery tool, this is going to limit that exposure change to the highlights themselves. It's going to pull more information out of the highlight. So when I do that here, the rest of the image stays okay, but now we have full detail throughout all the gown. And we've done a lot of work on this tool over the years. It used to be, if you go back a couple years and you tried to recover highlights, well, you'd recover the highlights really well, but then everything in the midtones would be a mess, or everything in the shadows would be a mess. We've done a lot of work to make sure that you can apply this tool, and you can apply it as much as you need it, while maintaining normal contrast through your midtones. This image here is a great example of an area where we've got shadows, we've got midtones, but we have this super blown out part of the highlights. And we'd love to get this information back, but we're a little worried that either we won't be able to get it all back, or that it'll mess up the image in some other way. In Capture 1.7, I can do 100% highlight recovery, gain back a lot of that information, and still have a pleasing file. If you go back 2 years, this type of correction really wasn't possible. We couldn't do this in Capture 1.6. We couldn't do this in Photoshop in those days, and now we can, because we've gotten so much better at this sort of at this math that takes place underneath the hood. Alternatively, if we've got a dark file and we're trying to recover our shadows, we use the shadow recovery tool. So again, we're getting a lot of detail back here that we wouldn't normally have gotten, while maintaining reasonable contrast throughout the image. We'll take questions at the end.
I don't want to get too far ahead, but are you going to be talking about other?
Not today, no.
Okay, just quickly then. Could you
So
apply this?
we'll ask at the end, please. So ultimately, there's a lot that we can do there that's only going to edit part of the image. So think about your exposure tools in terms of, do I need to make the entire image darker, the entire image brighter, or do I only need to apply a small portion of that? Some other tools that we've got in here. Curve. Curve can be tricky to deal with. A lot of people think about curves and, okay, let me just make my highlights brighter, let me make my shadows darker. One of the things that makes curves really workable is the ability to go in with a picker tool. So what we've got here is a picker tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click 3 different spots on this image. And when I do that, that's going to set anchor points. So in this case, we're going to look at highlight portion here in the snow. Let's take a mid-tone reading on the mountainside and a shadow reading down here in the corner. And we're not actually setting any values. We're just setting anchor points on the curve. And so once I have that, what we can do is we can go up with our highlights without moving our midtones, which were important, without moving our shadows. Or I can introduce a little more shadow detail here and then adjust the midtones accordingly. And again, we can use that to bring in varying levels of contrast while not allowing certain elements of the scene to get edited in ways that we don't want them to. Another tool that we've got over here in the color tab, this is the black and white tool. Now there's a couple ways that we can approach black and white in an image. For one, we can approach black and white as simply as saying, let me take my saturation down to 0, and now I've got a black and white image. But when I do that, the downside of this methodology is that the only thing I can do now is edit for contrast and exposure. We can make it more contrasty, we can make it less contrasty, we can make it brighter, we can make it darker, but we don't have any more individual control over parts of the file. What the black and white tool is going to do is it's going to map every color to a grayscale tone, but it's ultimately going to keep the color under the hood. So the front of the parachute is still orange, the back of the parachute is still red, but they display as black and white. Let me just show you here. We're going to turn on the black and white tool. And now I have separate controls for the different areas of the image. We can take the red and make it very dark, or make it very bright. Same with the yellow. Our blue sky, we can light and darken. So we have a great ability then to further go in and control everything that's going on. This is sort of the beauty of the black and white tool. Beyond that, then we have the ability to change split tones. So if I wanted to make our highlights go yellow and our shadows go blue, we can do that. Typically, we wouldn't use it maybe in this scenario, but if we wanted to just add a fine tint to the overall image, we could do that here. Another example here of just what we can do in the black and white tool. First thing I'm going to do is just give us a decent exposure to start with, or not so much a decent, but a better exposure. So I'm just filling in my levels tool there. Now I'm going to go back to the gray balance tool, or the black and white tool, excuse me. And again, this image has subtle colors going on. We've got some yellows, we've got some reds, we've got some blues in the sky. So if I bring the blue up and the cyan up, we make the sky a little bit brighter. In the rocks, we can bring up some red, bring up some yellow, and we can do some different things here. And so if I combine that with a little vignette, a little clarity, we can really begin to make the image pop a little bit.
Do you have a brush for local adjustments?
I do, but again, like I said, any questions we'll address at the end. A couple other things that are worth touching on here. Lens corrections. This is an image with a fair amount of barrel distortion. It's a relatively wide angle lens. So you can see that when we look at the shapes of the windows, we're going to get a bit of a curve taking place. And we see the same thing on the bottom. This is a natural phenomenon in any wide-angle lens. It's very difficult to make a lens that doesn't have any sort of distortion built in. So one of the things that we've been really trying to do at Phase 1 over the last couple of years is get as many lenses in-house where we can take special photographs that actually map out the way this lens shifts across the scene. So we can see exactly where this distortion comes, and then we can correct for it during our raw conversion, so that instead of just taking data and stretching it and compressing it, we're generating the data in the first place to fill in the pattern of what the lens has. So here we go to the lens tool under profile. I'm just going to choose the lens that this is, and it's a Mamiya 35mm. And when I choose that tool, automatically corrected for all of any imperfections that are in there. So in terms of the distortion gets removed. There's a couple other things that we would take care of. One of the things we call chromatic aberration. This is something we see a lot on cameras. I think one of the single-handed things that it has made Capture One so much better for the cameras that I shoot with day in and day out have been the lens tools. That's the biggest improvement to image quality that we can really apply here. And let me show you the difference that that can make. So here's an image, again, taken with a similar lens. And let me add some saturation here so you can really see it. What you've got happening here is called chromatic aberration. As you get to the outside of a wide-angle lens, colors begin to separate. So you can see that when you look at this shadow on there, one side of it's blue, and the other side of it's red. In the tree here, you see these little green edges to all the shadows. And so on every side of the detail, one side of the detail is green or blue, the other side of the detail is red. If you go home and start looking at a lot of your files, look around the outside of the files, you'll begin to see this everywhere. And when that happens, because you've got light entering in from the lens and getting separated out like that, you lose detail, you lose sharpness. And of course, you get little color shifts that we don't want to see. What Capture One can do here is it can analyze the image for this and correct for it automatically. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to put a little checkbox here where it says chromatic aberration. And Capture One's going to take care of the rest. And so when I correct for that, that color shift, not only does it go away, but we're not just changing the color, we're actually realigning the color values. We're realigning the pixels. So if you watch this, the whole image just tightens up a little bit. We get a little more detail back in that wood. We get a little more detail back in the tree back there. And overall, we end up with a much more pleasing file. And we don't actually have to have a lens measured to do this. We don't have to have a preset setting to do this. We can take any file that has this phenomenon, figure out where this is occurring in the image, and with the click of a button, correct for it so that you don't have to worry about, oh, did I apply this enough? Did I do it too little? Did I overcompensate, undercompensate? Capture One's going to do the analysis for you. It's going to give you the perfect correction each time. It's really, really easy to use. It's no more than checking a box. I use this feature all the time. I shoot a lot with my personal camera is an Olympus OMD EM5. I love it. I can't say enough good things about it. And I use it with a 20mm lens quite frequently. So I get distortion, I get chromatic aberration, and a couple check boxes here, and it's all taken care of. It gives me much better image quality, and better image quality than I was getting using anything straight out of the camera. So the last tool that I want to spend a little bit of time looking at, and then we'll start to kind of open things up for some questions, is a tool that we have here called the color editor. Now, the color editor is available in both Express and Pro, but with the Pro version, you get a few more features and you get really enhanced capabilities to use it. But let me show you first what we can do on the Express side. The idea behind the color editor is to give you selective color adjustments. It's to say, okay, look at the reds and magentas, and let's shift the color a little bit, or let's enhance them, or make them less noticeable. We can do the same in the greens and the blues. and so forth. So when I look at this file, when I look at this image, and I always have to make some new adjustments to it based on what the monitor projector is doing that day. But one of the things we want to do here is my overall color balance is okay. The problem is I'm a little bit green in the foreground and I'm a little bit blue in the background. And unfortunately, if I try to make a global color adjustment, because my image is going two separate ways, I can't really do that. What the color editor is going to allow me to do is take some green out of the yellows and add some, I think in this case we're going to add a little purple to the blues. So what I'm going to do is, again, this is another one where we can use a dropper to select very specific areas of the image. So click on the dropper, and let's click on this yellow area. And so that's chosen, because sometimes you're not sure if it's in this triangle or this triangle. This dropper really helps you do that. And what we're going to do here is, if I go one direction, we'll make it a little more green. You can see it's more green without affecting the background. And this way is a little more yellow. We're just going to take out a little bit of green, and then I'm going to take the lightness, and we're just going to make it a little brighter. A little extra brightness. Not a lot, but just enough to make it stand out a little bit more. Now we'll go into the background, and I'll click on the mountain here. So that's sort of halfway in between our blues. And from there, we can make this a little more purple. So now I'm working with colors that work a little bit better together in terms of the foreground and the background. We can make this a little bit darker, and that'll add just a little bit extra detail back there. And that's sort of what we can do with the basic color editor. We can shift colors within specific ranges around the image. So if my yellows are panning a little bit one way and my reds are panning a little bit the other, or let's say I've got a strawberry in the image, I want to make it just a little more red, we can adjust just the reds in Capture One, add a little saturation, make them a little brighter, take out any color shifts that are going on there. If I wanted to take this a step further, we could go into the advanced version. This is if I'm working in Capture One Pro, I have access to the advanced version of this tool. Once I'm in the advanced version of the tool, instead of giving you preset wedges, we allow you to select very specific color ranges. And so now I've selected that, we can modify how big or how little that color range is. And my tools can do a lot more. I can make the background much darker by taking the lightness down even farther. So we can add more drama there. In the foreground, we can make this a bit lighter still. So again, adding more drama, adding more features, being much, much more precise. With the Advanced Color Editor tool, I can go in and select a very specific shade of red and edit only that specific shade of red. If I mix that with a local area adjustment, I can confine it to a specific part of the image. Right now, I'm working very much globally, but this is our way to go in and tweak colors themselves separately from the rest of the image, so we're not combined down to one thing. With that said, that's sort of my basic overview.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.